Speaking of energy expended, our first question, and maybe Arnold, we could start with you. How does airflow management drive efficiency in the data center environment? For those who aren't familiar with it, with how important airflow is.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I say, our focus is on cooling. There's lots of experts out there on the IT side. There's been a lot of work done on the IT side, improving the efficiency of servers, etc. It's been, quite frankly, it's been incredible to see how much server efficiency has increased. The basic physics of it, though, is the fact that for every server, for every kilowatt of energy that's going into a server, you're generating 1 kilowatt of heat. And that has to be dealt with in the data center. In today's world, air is the primary medium that is used to cool. So you have to make sure you've got enough proper temperature airflow going over the server in order to cool those components properly. So when we look at a site, we take a holistic view from a data center point of view, what's going on within that entire data center to see what's happening to the airflow in there. And of course, I think we hear it a lot of times, people say, well, just increase the set points on your cooling units because that will increase the temperature and therefore increase the efficiency. But it's not as easy as that. Definitely increasing set points will increase cooling efficiency because your cooling systems have to work less, but you've got to do a lot of other work. And when we work in a data center, the very first thing we do when we walk in is look at airflow management. How can we improve that, and how can we optimize airflow management in there? So people talk about cooling capacity. We look at cooling capacity of systems, but we've seen many sites where you've got 2 times, 3 times the amount of cooling capacity in a site, but you still don't have N+1 cooling, which means if cooling unit fails, you're going to be in trouble. And that's because of the way the cooling units are laid out and because of the poor airflow within sites. So improving airflow efficiency can, number one, reduce your OpEx costs quite considerably. Number two, it actually means too, if you do a good job of it, you can increase the IT load that you have in your site as well, because you've increased the efficiency, which means you're deferring CapEx, and it means also you're deferring CapEx for another cooling system or another couple of cooling systems that you would typically put into a site because you're thinking, I've got hot spots in my site as such. So there's all kinds of implications of improving airflow efficiency, and it's to me, it's the first thing that you should be doing in a site. And that's why if you look at our site, look at it in our papers, you'll see a little icon in the bottom that says airflow rules, because it is airflow rules in a data center. That's the most important thing that you can do in a site, and one of the biggest things that you can do to improve energy efficiency in a site.
Gotcha. And maybe to make this more tangible to the audience, is there perhaps a real world example we could use to start off with?
Yeah, well, when we go into a site, we have a total program called the cooling optimization program. But as I say, airflow management is the first thing. So, for example, go into a site and look and see, are they using blanking panels in their racks? Are there spaces between the racks, which means potentially the warm exhaust air is coming back around to the front of the racks, causing the inlet temperatures to increase in there, which in a lot of cases people say, well, I've got a hot spot in my data center. Well, let's have a look and see. Well, no, you don't. You do have a hot spot, but it's not because you don't have enough cooling. It's the fact that you've got poor airflow management. You're allowing that warm exhaust air to come into the site. Another case, so we always start with blanking panels, make sure they're in place, make sure there's no spacing between the racks. We look at adding containment if that's feasible. In a lot of sites, it is quite feasible to add aisle containment or airflow containment, either cold aisle or hot aisle. So typically, I say in the work that we do, if you look at doing all of those measures from an airflow point of view, improving airflow management, and in a lot of cases too, we go what we call a step further. We go to airflow optimization, and what that means is how much airflow do I need coming to my racks to properly cool them, and how much am I actually providing? And our objective is to match that up as closely as we can, 1-to-1. So back to my earlier statement about producing a kilowatt of heat. For every kilowatt of heat that you're producing, you need the guidelines range between 120 and 150 cubic feet per minute. We typically use 150 cubic feet per minute. So if you look at your cooling units, your air handlers, your crack units, there's specifications on all those as to how much airflow they're providing. Hopefully they're reasonably close in the real world to what the spec sheets say. And we also do airflow measurements on the perforated tiles if it's a raised floor to understand how much air is actually coming up through the perforated tiles. And again, we've seen cases where we go into a quite well-run data center and look at the spec sheets on the cooling units and compare that to what our measurements are in the perforated tiles, and it's about 90%. We've gone into other data centers where we've seen that number being in the 30s as such. So that means for every cubic foot of air that you're putting out of your cooling system, 70% of it is going somewhere else rather than coming up through the perforated tiles. So you've got to look at the integrity of the floor. You got to look at the holes under the racks as well too, and make sure those are filled as well. So just by blowing more air into the data center is not going to achieve your objective of cooling the equipment properly. So as I say, when we by improving the cooling, by improving the airflow to the racks at the right temperature, you can then possibly push up your set points. And if you push up your set points by looking at let's use a crack unit as an example, you can increase the cooling capacity of that crack unit by 25%. So again, means I've got more cooling capacity. I can add more IT load to the site. I don't have to spend CapEx for an additional cooling unit as such. So there's a whole array of benefits that are achieved, and it's all driven by improving airflow management in your site.
I don't think a lot of us are considering that. I think there's so many levels to this, and so when you hear that, and this is why I wanted you to go into that kind of detail, because there's so much that goes into it, and this is such a long study here. What are your thoughts, Professor Lee, on airflow management?
I think Mr. Murphy has actually given an excellent overview of the importance of data center airflow management. I'd just like to add that he mentioned, for example, the raising set point, improving, for example, the COP of the chiller system. I think on top of that, the holistic assessment will be the necessary. Obviously, as you raise the set point, it's very clear that the cooling system will be more efficient, right? Because basically your evaporator temperature will be higher. But then there's also a potential power benefit for the IT equipment, right? Because now you're basically getting your junction temperature of your processor chips to be at a higher level. So that can actually potentially increase the power consumed by your server hard drive. So I think my take is actually it has to be a holistic assessment, right? So beyond just looking at the cooling system power consumption. So you also have to factor the potential power penalty for your IT equipment. The other is obviously the so-called IT equipment reliability. As you operate them at higher temperature, whether or not these are hardened so that they can still reliably operate at elevated temperature for extended period of time, because we know that obviously data center is expected to be operating 24/7, 365 days a year. So I think there are a couple of other associated issues that needs to be collectively addressed, well beyond just looking at the power consumption by the cooling system. I think the other thing is actually certainly, I think, to extract the most optimal performance out from the cooling system. I think obviously there can be the use of, for example, variable frequency drives for example, for your fans or for your pumps. So I think this will actually serve to further squeeze additional savings out from the cooling system. But I'd like to also mention that increasingly there's a lot of use of smart control, for example, through AI, machine learning. And I think with such systems, then there's actually a possibility to really look into the coupling of IT power and cooling, which I briefly alluded to just now, so that it can actually really holistically sort of assess what is the so-called effects of making various the changes do the settings of your cooling systems, yeah, so that a balanced decision can be adopted.
Gotcha. So we have to remember that there's hardware efficiency and there's software efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
We need to
Definitely
optimize both in these cases.
And totally agree. I mean, it is, and that's the thing. I totally agree. It's a holistic approach that you have to look at the site to see. There's been some great advancements on the server side, and if you go back, I remember 2010, 2011, 2012, some of the projections that were there for data center energy consumption. At that point in time, people were saying, well, it's 2% of the global energy consumption, and we're projecting it's going to be up into the 15-20%. Well, now I'm seeing numbers that are saying it's actually about 1%. It has not gone up that major curve that they were projecting, and a lot of it was due to server technology, the improvements in server technology, as well as virtualization and aspects like that as well. So it's, I mean, I read a number of reports, and people are saying data center energy efficiency has actually made some massive strides and improvements, which people were not expecting, I don't think, and I expect there's a number of reasons why that was driven that way, but it's definitely improving. Yeah, still lots of room for improvement, but definitely improving.
No, and I think that's fantastic, because what we're looking at on the data center construction side, I mean, we're looking at least 3 gigawatts globally under construction right now in terms of data centers. And so that's we have to do something to decrease the carbon footprint there.
Yeah.